This call would have been over by now if you just
If I'd had a power source,
yeah.
or go waiting on me.
No, no. We have all the time in the world. There you are. Well, listen, I'd like to welcome to BeerNet Radio. We have two special guests. We have Lori Knight, Executive Vice President of the National Beer Wholesalers Association of Government Affairs, and we have Craig Purser, President and CEO. Thanks, guys, for being on BeerNet Radio, the podcast where all your dreams come true. Merry Christmas, guys. Thanks for being on. How are things in Washington?
Oh, just ducky, just absolutely fantastic. Oh, God. The good news is the rest of the world is not Washington.
Yeah. We've had a hell of a year, Craig. And walk us through like some of the challenges, and did we have any wins? Did we have any losses? What's our scorecard looking like?
Well, I actually think that when we look at 23 in total, there's a lot of people that can't put it in the rearview mirror fast enough. We've had some real challenges as it relates to the industry volumes. We've had a brand challenge that's been completely unprecedented. We've had some politics that have been totally and completely unprecedented. Isn't even right. It's never happened before this way. But nonetheless, I actually think that there's some strong fundamentals to this industry that we really need to celebrate. And so we're honored to be your guest for the last podcast of 23. But if we leave with nothing else, it's this is still a tremendous business. Lots and lots and lots of people want what we've got. They want in this business. This business is expanding like never before. And so there is a lot to celebrate.
Did you all see it looks like the FTC and Total Wine came to an agreement yesterday. I guess we don't really know what the agreement is, but it looks like probably they agreed on how much information Total Wine has to give. And the whole thing looks to me is that the Total Wine just doesn't want them getting down to that invoice level to see what's really going on. That's conjecture. I guess, Lori, given that the administration has kind of focused on alcohol, on competition in the space, what are you seeing on Capitol Hill? Like, is there any talk of alcohol at all, or what's the hot topics, if any?
There were conversations ongoing, and certainly there was a more significant emphasis on those conversations in the beginning of the year this year and at the end of last year. I would characterize it, Harry, by saying as the year progressed and higher priority issues from the administration standpoint became more prominent, and then the chaos that ensued, going into the end of the year passage of the CR, and then what that meant ultimately, as we all saw play out for Speaker McCarthy, those types of dynamics and the close margins with margins being Republican to Democratic ratio in the House and Senate really provoked a lot of those other issues to be maybe not totally back burner issues, but not front and center, not prominent issues. And I did. Yeah, exactly. And
so making sure craft brewers have a route to market is not on the same level as Ukraine and Israel.
Well, and I noticed you mentioned about, kind of the administration's emphasis on, obviously we're talking specific to alcohol, but just on competition overall. I was reading something this morning. There had been a lot of conversation going on in DC and coming out of the administration with regard to addressing competition in the marketplace, but really more activity was coming out of the UK and other countries, not just the US. So, and I when I say that, it kind of made me harken back to the executive order, and that there was this kind of a robust effort expressed in the executive order to address competition and evaluate competition in the U.S. marketplace. And if you read what I read, kind of top lines on this morning, I didn't have the chance to go deep, but what I read top lines on this morning, it was an indication of what I just said, that intentions, were big and strong in the beginning, but as we wrap up at the end of the year, or as they wrap up for the end of the year, there was less, progress made than anticipated or that they had hoped.
Right. because it's on the UK's shoulders to make sure that we all have the same charging unit for our iPhones. And, God bless the UK, because
Yeah.
now we can just have one charger for every device. Who knows with an administration change, what's going to happen, right? I mean, there's no use in predicting because we just don't know what that's going to look like. But having said that, it seems to me that if anything else, the TTV is going to be looking at rulemaking and looking at, mostly it looks like category management and giving something of value and trade media and that sort of thing. And are we in alignment with the wine and spirits guys on what we want the TTV to do?
I think we are for the most part. I think that the industry recognizes that this, the status quo works pretty well. It's pretty robust. It's pretty competitive. Everybody has access to market. And, some of the craft manufacturers will argue with that, but the facts are in most states now, they're able to sell direct. They're able to sell direct to consumer. In many places, they're able to sell direct to retail. They've got self-distribution. They really have been successful in getting that access that they've been seeking for the last 20 years. And that varies. We've always known that there are 50 different markets and 50 different sets of rules and regulations. Nobody should be surprised by that. But by and large, this system works well. But make no mistake about it, what we saw from that advance notice of proposed rulemaking for TTB with 21 specific areas that were addressed was ambitious. And that kind of a proposed rulemaking, Lori knows this, having been in and around government for a good while, those proposed rules outlast an administration. And TTB, I tell people this all the time, works sometimes with glacial speed, which means thousands of years. And they will find something, kind of like something you might find at your couch at home, Harry, and you look at it and you go, oh shit, I didn't know I had that. I better do something with it. And if it's $100 bill, that makes it easy. If it's a piece of pizza from Thursday night, you've got a dilemma.
Even better. Right. But I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, the TTV, they know not what they have, which is the FAA Act. And, category management should this category captaincy, if you read the law, it kind of looks like it already is illegal. But, hey, I'm not a lawyer. I know, Lori, you are. But, on the other thing on the federal level, that's I think it's a tempest in a teapot because of what Canada might be doing. But what about dietary guidelines? Are we in any danger? Because everybody's talking about how any amount of alcohol can be bad for you, may cause cancer. There's been a lot of press. Nobody's talking about moderation being healthy anymore. What are we looking at there?
Whether or not it's tedious, I don't know if that's the right word for it or not, Harry. I mean, it's a work in progress is how I would describe that. The agencies have started pretty early in trying to impanel their specialists and their experts to sit down and review existing dietary guidelines and make evaluations and determinations based on science that they think is in the quote best interest of the public. And from a response standpoint, we certainly we are certainly participating in a responsible way that supports a responsible approach, but also we believe we believe that the approach should include sound, credible, reliable science to ensure that they strike the right balance for the public. So the existing standards that have come out of the dietary guidelines for years and years now have been a 2-drink a day recommendation for men, 1 drink a day recommendation for females. So they have that as a foundation, and they're certainly evaluating again any changes that they view may be necessary. And from a legislative standpoint, they're waiting and watching, kind of what that progress will will be. So it's early in the stages to say really where things are going to land.
And is there anything political about that? I mean, so I
That's a
thought
trick.
science was science, but it seems like there's
When you say political, I would say there's two meanings of that word, and political from the Hill means one thing. Political to somewhat the private sector may mean another thing. But I think that the Hill approach has been responsible thus far in terms of what they have mandated and requested, and their desire to see a responsible outcome from the agencies and the scientists. Craig?
Yeah, and I would just add that the whole notion of public health and dietary guidelines it's seeking balance, and it is the harm from use of alcohol is well known, and I think that people are aware of this. We do have a number of folks that are super motivated, and this is where the politics come in to get their licks in. They are seeking additional restrictions, some of which may be rooted in science, some of which clearly is not. We had an effort in 2020 that was narrowly defeated, where we had a minority on the committee that was actually putting together these guidelines that had a long history of advocating for additional excise taxes, for additional marketplace restrictions, but more importantly, who were putting forward, research that wasn't baked and it wasn't complete. And at the end, tried to influence the system to adjust that kind of recommended guidance as it relates to what could be part of a healthy lifestyle. And so, the industry was successful in coming together and stopping that from moving forward. It was at the end of an administration. These next regulations guidelines are due in 2025 at the end of the calendar year, and that may be the same administration. It may be a new administration. We don't have any idea. Ours is to try to work to facilitate, a process that's fair, that is an all-of-government approach that includes input from Health and Human Services as well as the United States Department of Agriculture. Both agencies have had this kind of as their purview for the last 30 to 40 years as it relates to these dietary guidelines.
Yeah, and look where that's gotten us: corn, carbs. You're right, Lori. I mean, politically means different, and they kind of floated a trial balloon saying that Canada is looking at 1 beer a week or something, 2 beers a week, and everybody's hair caught on fire. And so I don't think anybody wants to touch that. So it could work in beer's favor. But the other kind of federal thing that is, that we've been kind of looking at is the notion of canned cocktails and spirit RTDs and how they're taxed. And mostly the action has been at the state level. Is there any effort by DISCUS to address that at the federal level, or is that just bad timing right now?
I don't know
Lori?
if I would. I don't know if I would credit to who the effort is or is not by, but what I would say that was kind of partially what I was saying earlier, Harry, that at the end of last year, at the end of 2022, and at the beginning of this year, we heard a lot more. There was a lot more chatter and conversation going on around that issue in particular, and the possibility of federal legislation on that issue. So here we are, December 19th. And so that did not come to fruition. So, and I think that the intelligence and the intelligence that we were receiving and the conversations that were going on at the beginning of the year were legitimate. It wasn't gossip. We had conversations directly with, specific members of Congress, and, so it was beyond just a theory or something that somebody heard at a reception. So it was out there, and my point of earlier, other things became more prominent from a legislative standpoint as the year ticked on. So we'll see. We'll see where things lead in the new year on that issue. But you can definitely. With a certainty, you can say that everybody in the industry is watching and watching that issue and has had conversations around it, whether it be beer, wine, or spirits. So, there's a focus on it.
Yeah.
I would add here, I think Laurie's being pretty modest here because she and I both at the end of the year had a conversation with a couple of members one-on-one that are leaders, that are from liquor producing jurisdictions, states or districts. And they were very honest about what they'd been approached to advance. And it really is a testament to Laurie, our team, and her leadership and our work with the Brewers, meaning Beer Institute, and with the Brewers Association that has helped, kind of keep that back on the porch. And bigger than that, or in addition to that, has been the work that we've done in the states, because most of these, to your point, were being advanced at the state level. And I remember nearly 3 years ago when this issue kind of first heated up, having a conversation with then Beer Institute President Jim McGreevey. Remember, New Jersey was the first state that was just on fire. And, he and I were very candid with each other saying, gosh, I don't know how this is going to play out. And indeed, it was Mike Halfacre from New Jersey, the state association exec, and, his ability to organize a coalition on the ground there and the work of everybody to do together. And that includes, Dave Chrisman from our team. That includes a number of our state beer wholesale execs that, put all their guns down and our points of disagreement on other stuff and work together to, keep this kind of equalization effort contained. And I'm really proud of the work that everybody's done.
Well, it does seem extremely important because, well, first of all, in the states where it has passed, you're not seeing a price decrease that helps the consumer or increases in tax revenues, which I think both were promised. The other thing is that it sets a really bad precedent because, equalization just, we noted that it doesn't work from a public policy standpoint and a public health standpoint. And you've got the WHO on one end going draconian the other way. Let's tax everything, the hell out of it. And I don't know where I'm going with this, but I guess the point is we're on the right side of history, I think, on this one. On the state side in 24, are we going to see a lot more action on that front?
Well, I think we don't know yet. I think it'll be interesting to see where those folks go. Interestingly, the liquor industry is not united in this. They are not of one voice as it relates to this. I think a lot of them see this as pulling at the fabric of a sweater that's going to, call into question all kinds of other tax treatments that different segments of the industry have. And I think that's important for everybody to note. So I'm not sure we're clear what's going to happen in 24, but nonetheless, and this is really important, Harry, the second part of what you said is important. Increasingly, our members are diversifying. We saw in 2023 a number of our distributors get the rights to distribute distilled spirits. And, our quarrel is not with the product. Our quarrel is not with our members selling wine, selling spirits, non-alcohol products. The whole notion is that if you call into question how the product is taxed based on the container that it's in, then you're going to have a problem. And all of a sudden, the fabric in that sweater gets really unraveled. So it's not that we're anti-liquor. It's not that we're anti-spirits or wine or any of these other products. It's just that what we believe is that we need to keep we need to maintain the system that we have that everybody operates under.
Right. Hi. Let's talk politics for a minute. National politics. We're going to stray a little bit away from the beer, wine, and spirits industry. And so, pretend like I'm new here, which I am. What happened with the speaker, just briefly, and what this new speaker that nobody seems to know, what's his gig? And is he gonna last? What's going on in Congress?
Look, you've got to go back at least to the beginning of this year, where what was unprecedented was what was conceded by Speaker McCarthy at the time as a condition of his election. You cannot get beyond that. That is where this cake was baked, was allowing as a concession to the Freedom Caucus and members in exchange for their vote. And they were asking for things that were outsized. And remember, some expected a bigger Republican majority as a result of the 22 elections. It was very narrow. It has gotten more narrow since then for a variety of reasons. But what was agreed to was 5 members of the party could, in a sense, call the question on you, advance a motion to vacate, and that number of people could deny you the maintenance of your leadership position. And so that deal ended up being a true Faustian bargain. And Faustian bargain has nothing to do with Don Faust, just for the
right. No, yeah, we're going back to Shakespeare, I think.
It's very, very literary. This is an upscale podcast.
Absolutely. Right, Biscuit? Yeah.
But the whole idea was it was a deal with the devil. And that is exactly what happened. And Kevin McCarthy, I think in a lot of ways, did the right thing. He, in the spring of the year, early summer, struck an amazing deal that the Republicans, in my opinion, should have called a victory. He got concessions out of the administration that nobody thought that they would get as it relates to spending, moved the ball forward. And as we approached a fiscal cliff at the end of the fiscal year, September 30, ran out of runway, literally, and once again was prepared to do the right thing to keep the government open. And that was not enough for some of these more extreme members of the Republican caucus. And obviously he was defeated. Laura, you want to?
So here we are, that's the background, and Craig's right. And, in the details of that. And so here we are today, and where the House ended and Congress ended in terms of that funding deal that they had to get done before the end of the fiscal year. They kicked the can and did it in a really unprecedented way. Kicking the can is not unprecedented, but kicking the can in the way that they accomplished it this year is unprecedented, in that it was a bifurcated to-date deadline on extension of various appropriation bills that are more work will need to be done on all of that in order to keep the government operating, or the government open, and those agencies funded. So after the fact, all of kind of the armchair quarterbacking in the reporting is that group of Republicans that were not willing to give McCarthy the running room were willing to give the new Speaker Johnson, the running room, because they had just gone through that very challenging speaker's race decision, and they wanted to exhibit some support for the guy that they just elected. So this two-day bifurcated approach is something that probably only he could have gotten away with, or he could have accomplished at this time. So here we are. The first date is January 19th. The second date, I believe it's the first week of February. I believe it's February 2nd, where more work will have to be done on all of that. Real work will have to be done on all of those appropriations bills to get an agreement. And, meanwhile, keep in mind, the margins in the House and the Senate, the House is Republican controlled. The Senate is Democratic controlled. The margins in both chambers are very, very narrow. And so all of that points to the fact that narrow margins in a bifurcated chamber like that, they're going to have to come up with some solution, some approach that they can get enough votes one way or the other to get something across the line in terms of government funding. I was at an event last week where there was already a lot of concern being expressed for the fact that they had gotten past a shutdown in September, October, but that Congress is probably looking at, or the government is potentially looking at, a shutdown in as early as January. I'm not forecasting if that will happen or not. I'm just saying that there's a lot of concern about that because of the work that needs to be done. And I think, Harry, right now they're scheduled to come back in town. The Congress is scheduled to come back in town on January 9th, or resume business on January 9th. Some of them are still in town. The Senate's still trying to work on today funding for Ukraine. So there's still folks around. But coming back on January 9th as an institution and a body with a deadline of January 19th doesn't leave a lot of time. So That may be more than you wanted or more that you care
No,
about in terms of appropriations, but that's what we're looking at.
well, this Matt Gaetz in Florida, and his kind of little posse, what is it that they want? I guess I've read about it, but I still don't. I'm not clear. Like, what did they want from McCarthy that they weren't getting?
Some of it's just personal, and it's just
Yeah.
personal and style. And it's grudges. There's an Irish curse, which is they've forgotten everything but the grudges. And that's, I think, what's at work here. And that's not picking on McCarthy because he's an Irishman. But the interesting thing is we dealt with this. We skipped the 3 weeks that would not end, where we were speakerless. And it's very, very interesting because there was a continuity of government piece that was passed after 9/11 that allowed for a temporary speaker to be appointed by the exiting speaker. And Patrick McHenry, who was chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, was made temporary speaker by fiat by this little known, never before used piece of legislation. And so as Kevin McCarthy vacated the chair, he became the temporary speaker. And interestingly, McHenry really, I think, was one of the heroes of this whole exercise because he did not go beyond what the law allowed, which was the first order of business is to elect a speaker. And many people were advocating for him to move forward. The Republicans could not come to an answer on electing a speaker 3 times.
Yeah.
Steve Scalise, the sitting whip, was not elected. Jim Jordan, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, not elected. Tom Emmer, the House Majority Whip, not elected. And of course, the compromise candidate became Michael Johnson. The interesting thing about all 4 of those people is that NBWA as an organization was really well positioned because we have a good relationship with all of them. And I point that out because, that's one of the things that we need to celebrate, and we need to kind of pause for a second and say, look, why do we have a good relationship with so many of these people? First and foremost, it's because our members, because every one of those legislative leaders has been in a beer wholesaler warehouse. I was sitting at a meeting in New York City, a global meeting of brewers, the day that the Johnson election came down. And Laurie texted me a picture from a warehouse visit that Mike Johnson had done in Shreveport, Louisiana, with one of our member companies in 2020 before the pandemic. That was a reminder of why we do what we do. As ugly and messy as democracy can be, and as difficult as things can be, and 2023 has been difficult, we're better off than many because we've got these tools, and the tools are our members. So just kind of a backstory of, this is not going to be pretty. 2024 is going to be hard, but the participation and the support for the organization has never been more important.
Right. And has George Santos been to any beer wholesalers? Have you met George Santos, Lori?
I did not meet him. I did pass him in the hall one day, but I've never met him. No.
I think the guy is an American hero. He became a congressman just by bullshitting. It just proves that you really doesn't take much. I mean,
he's Jonah from Veep. Anybody that's a Veep fan knows. I mean, it's like it's life imitating art. It's crazy.
Right. It's going to be a great Netflix movie, I'm sure. Tell me, I read about in my own publication, because I do read it every day. Sometimes I even write it. But I read about this 21st Amendment caucus. Tell me, what is this? What is this 21st Amendment caucus?
That is a newly launched collaboration with NBWA, WSWA, ABL, with the American Beverage Licensees, and where there is a coalition in place of bipartisan House coalition of Republican and Democratic members of Congress, who the group is being led by on the Republican side, Congresswoman Bice from Oklahoma, and on the Democratic side, Congresswoman Lee from Nevada. And so they're the anchor leads on the caucus. And it's a group that has come together to say, that they want to support the foundation of, the alcohol the three-tier system of alcohol regulation and the alcohol regulatory structure. It's also a group that will be useful in educating their colleagues on some of the fundamentals of the alcohol industry and the dynamics, if you will, of the alcohol industry. So it's a voice, and it's an extension of an advocacy voice, in that they're there to they and their staffers, I should say, staff members are there to take in more information and learn more about the structure of the alcohol industry, and then also serve as a conduit to their congressional colleagues on those fronts as well. So when there's alcohol policy before the Congress or before their committees or anything, relevant coming down the pipeline, that there's, a deeper, a further educated, I don't want to say more educated, but a further educated coalition of members.
Right. Okay. 2024, what do you anticipate to be the big issues for beer wholesalers? And I mean beer wholesalers specifically. Like, is there like death tax? Is there capital gains? Like, what are we worried about in next year's Congress?
So some of those, just to pick up on where you dropped off, some of those tax provisions from the 2017 tax bill, some of those are set to expire in the end of 2025. So whether it's, extension of the increases on the estate tax exemptions in the rate, or modifications to the Section 199A deduction, or bonus depreciation and expensing, there was a large category, the state and local tax deduction, some of those, there was a large group of tax issues that were included in that bigger tax package that were not made permanent. So as we get closer to that expiration date of any and all of those, it depends on, Congress will be looking more at tax policy in 2024 than they did in 2023. Again, for some of the reasons I've already expressed. In addition to those reasons, also, they tend to hold on to some of those tax related issues in an election year. So I think you'll see more activity out of, the House leadership in terms of prioritizing the focus on tax policy in order to be able to talk publicly about what they're doing on tax policy. So, where all of that ends up is still, that's too early to say or predict, but I don't believe it's I do not believe it's incorrect to say that there'll be a greater focus on it going into the new year for those reasons, and for those looming and pending deadlines as well. If they're going to if they don't do something on them, whether it's make them permanent or extend them or make further modifications, then those provisions all sunset.
Right.
A lot of these members of Congress, particularly those that were just elected in the last two election cycles, believe it or not, they don't understand this. They don't understand that the tax relief that was granted to our members as pass-through businesses as part of the 2017 tax package evaporates after 2025. So there really is an effort that's got to start in earnest in 24 of educating folks and understanding. And, this is going to have to be, it's going to be working with Republicans, but it's also going to be working with Democrats to move this effort forward, because so much of, I think, the economic success of our economy has been because of the performance and the contribution of pass-through businesses. Unfortunately, President Trump and Congress back then made Wall Street's tax relief permanent with a lowering of the rate, and, gave small business in Main Street just a temporary relief. So we will be making this a priority. The other thing that's Lori and her team have been working on over time with great success is making certain that any kind of preemptive policy that moves forward is dead in its tracks. And that includes, of course, the DTC effort that was being advanced by some manufacturers as it relates to, putting alcohol in the U.S. Postal Service, which is a terrible piece of policy. And, I keep thinking that surely this thing will die. It was brought back this year as part of this Congress, but those are the kind of policies that we're going to continue fighting.
Right. I mean, it's unbelievable to me that you seem to be saying there are members of Congress that don't understand what a pass-through business is or how the tax code works. I mean,
No, they know that part. They don't know that our tax relief runs out.
right.
They don't know that in order for it to be included in the, there's budget constraints in 17 that, once again, Congress they picked Wall Street with a permanent rate reduction, and they gave us a rate reduction that was temporary.
Typical Congress. I can't believe George Santos doesn't understand all this.
He and his other personalities and pseudonyms, none of them understand.
I can't wait for the movie. Okay. And then one of the things is that we have seen out of the FTC dredging out of the murk of the swamp, this old Scott Rodin. No, what am I saying? What's the law that they're bringing back for antitrust?
Robinson-Patman.
Thank you. Robinson-Patman. It seems like they're looking at Coke and Pepsi. They may be looking at Southern we don't really know what they're looking at for Southern. And then Total Wine's gotten roped into it. Again, is this dependent on the administration continuing with Lena Khan, or could this bleed into other administrations where there is more of an effort to, kind of look at antitrust in a different way, not from the end consumer per se, but along the supply chain?
I'm not sure, Harry, I totally caught the question. So forgive me, but you said a lot and maybe you said nothing. I don't know.
Well, you wanted a coherent question. Is this what I'm hearing?
I don't know. I mean,
so here's what let me tell you how I understand it. And then you tell me if I'm wrong. So in past, the government's like, whatever is great for low prices for the consumer is a win. Whereas now they're saying, well, if you give a better price to this retailer over this retailer, depending on size, even though you're getting a better price to the consumer who shops at this retailer, that's still unfair. And we need to level the playing field and, do Coke and Pepsi give better deals based on size? Well, of course they do. I mean, everybody has been doing that. But is that change in policy? It could have an effect on how big brewers price their stuff, I guess.
So interestingly, Harry, I think there's two things here that are really important when we talk about antitrust. And I'm not the lawyer. Laurie is, so she'll correct me. That's why I'm going first. But the interesting thing is when it comes to, you mentioned Lena Khan and you mentioned some of the other kind of academics or activist type folks that are viewing antitrust for this administration. There's an interesting kind of confluence where some of these market critics are coming from not just the left, but from the right. We're seeing that with the labor policy. We're seeing that with some Republican U.S. senators who are maybe non-traditional in their approach to economics and their view of economic power. So I don't think we can easily just put this over in a corner necessarily and say this is this administration only. There is criticism of big, and that is, I think, going to be with us for a while. When you look at the influence of technology and the outsized influence of the healthcare industry at large, both of those are massive targets for both criticism and reform. Now, traditional antitrust, and you're right of the view of price being king, does not work for alcohol. And this is really important. All of us, and sometimes we get into a little bit of disputes with our supplier partners because they don't necessarily appreciate this. But when it comes to beverage alcohol, the lowest price to consumer is not necessarily the lowest cost to society. Right. And so if you understand that, then you've got to take a deep breath and understand there's a difference between Coke and Pepsi and their products and alcohol beverages. And so some criticism and the use of Robinson-Patman, as I understand it, goes to things like channel pricing. And it's not just big versus little, it's grocery stores versus convenience stores. It's products that are bought for resale. It's a whole host of other issues that are, that are important, but they're maybe not as applicable to alcohol. So
Right.
that's just kind of
And just,
my
yeah,
observation that we have to keep in context when we think about this market criticism.
and just to kind of a focus on a resurrection, if you will, of Robinson Packman as a tool for, addressing some of those things. I think that yeah, Craig's right. I am a lawyer, but I'm not an antitrust lawyer, and I haven't really done any of that in quite some time. However, there's been criticism about the outright dormancy of the use of Robinson Packman to regulate and control, and some of that whatever your perspective is, but that anti-competitive behavior. So that when you mention Robinson Packman, that's what the focus is. It's like, there is that law on the books. Why is it not being used is the question.
To go along, my dad used to always say cheap beer is bad for the working man. And, he's right. But on the other hand, and this is kind of out of your regulatory type Washington purview, but it seems to me that we've been taking aggressive price increases for the last, 10 years. And everybody keeps saying, it's cheaper to get a handle of Tito's than it is to get a case of beer now. And that's a problem. And Craig, what are your thoughts on that? Like, it seems like, yeah, I don't necessarily think we have a category problem. We have a relative price problem.
Well, look, price has got to be part of the analysis that we look at when we look at what's challenging the category. And I think you're 1,000% right. That's got to be something. I was looking at a deck from a supplier just the other day that talked about pricing since 2001 and the incredible run and success and ability for the market to take price when it comes to beer. And we have to be careful when we talk about that. Interestingly, from a competitiveness standpoint, we can talk about prices going backwards. We can't talk about prices going forward.
All right.
But that has to be part of that's part of the volume that we've lost. And I think distributors have done a great job of evolving quickly, because the measure 20 years ago was all about boxes, how many cases, case. And now we know that is not the measurement. It is dollars indeed. So that's got to be part of it. But I'm one that believes we can walk and chew gum. I think I do think we're not addressing the relevance of traditional beer. I think that the data indicates that there's an entire generation of beer drinkers, and obviously price has played a role. That's got to be part of it, but that have been sacrificed for profits. And so that's got to be part of this. My concern is, are we doing anything to address the category decline as it relates to preference in the eyes of consumers? What are we doing to make the product more relevant for emerging LDA consumers? All of those, we can do both. We can admit and realize that price is part of that, and we can admit that we need to do something to advance the category. Oh, and by the way, the other walking and chewing gum is we also can help facilitate our members, just like our suppliers that are diversifying their portfolio. We can help them do more as it relates to non-alcohol products. We can help them do more if they choose to enter the spirits or the wine industry.
Okay. That makes sense. And yeah, I think, honestly, I think beer flavored beer is going to make a comeback. I think these things go in waves. The public gets a sweet tooth, and then they switch back to bitter, and then they switch back to, we're in sweet territory right now, but it'll go back to bitter. And beer's, it's just so healthy. I mean, it really, I'm not being facetious. It really is. If you look at all the alcohol options out there, just beer flavored beer is just natural. There's nothing else in it. It's a good product. Okay. So lastly, let's talk about another perceived health issue, and that is cannabis. The perception that cannabis is healthier than alcohol, and we now have almost half the states with some sort of recreational legal cannabis. There's a little bit of rattling up on Capitol Hill that maybe marijuana could be descheduled in the next administration, or probably ideally they leave it to the states since they already have. I could see it in the future ending up like alcohol, that it's a patchwork thing and a 3-tier type setup. What are your thoughts on cannabis, and is there anything on the horizon that kind of we should be watching?
I'll jump in and just start by saying cannabis is kind of like the tax issues, in that I think there will be more interest in an election year to do more on that issue, in order to, again, for the administration to be able to go out and talk about what they're doing and do a little bit of, focus a little bit on voter turnout for a constituency of voters that care about that issue. So there, I think the first thing out of Congress that you would maybe see, it would be advancement on that bill, Harry, that would allow for safe banking. So in jurisdictions where marijuana is legal and businesses are operating within the legal constructs of that jurisdiction, that they would be able to bring that business revenue within the normal financial services industry. So they've been looking at that and talking about that for a long time. They really actually made more progress, they being Congress, they made more progress on that the second half of this year, in that safe banking bill did get out of the Senate committee. It didn't get to the Senate floor, but Majority Leader Schumer has said then and now that he would be supportive of bringing safe banking legislation to the floor. Again, the shift and the attention on the Hill kind of took took everything over, and that didn't get done. But there's next year, so it's the coming year. So there is a little bit of breaking, or a little bit of advancement on the legislative front. And then you mentioned, Harry, about the possibility of descheduling. And I think what you're talking about, or I know what you're talking about, is that the HHS, Health and Human Services, said that they felt that the DEA needed the drug agency needed to take a look at that, see if reclassification was the right thing to do. So it's really not an HHS decision. It's ultimately a DEA decision. And even if they decide that it is the right thing to do, and DEA makes an announcement that they will move forward with the recommendation out of HHS, it would still involve a rulemaking process, which is a little bit of, it's a time-consuming process to do that. So we would still be looking at that regulatory process over at DEA. So if that should happen, how quickly it may come to fruition, that's not an immediate. There won't be an immediate outcome on that, but it may or may not. If they move in that direction, it may be accomplished through the end of 2024. It may not be, but there, I think you will see a little bit of advancement on both. We saw a little bit of activity 2 years ago during the midterm, or a year and a half ago during, in advance of the midterms, on that issue as well. So I think there's timing on some of these things that play favorably for, the political process as well. So timing's important.
Yeah. And the other thing is, Harry, our board, we have had this on our agenda for nearly 10 years now. And we have not made this a central priority. Our kind of marching orders on this include, or continue to include, or be built around ensuring that the alcohol regulatory system, is maintained during all this debate and discussion. We've seen not one, but two of our supplier partners beef up, build up, spend up, invest in, and then completely exit the either CBD or THC business. And,
Right.
It was just this time last year when we watched both of them, continue their withdrawal. We've also seen a couple of states that have gone more green for CBD beverages. However, those CBD beverages are very different than the CBD beverages that were being offered in the marketplace 5 years ago. The Delta 8 and 9 variants, the O variant, those different products that do give an effect are, I think, creating certainly a federal gray area that's being probably the most generous, but we don't know how this is going to look. And so, I think everybody needs to be examining this for themselves, consulting their own lawyers. Every state's different. This administration has not made as much noise. And it's, they've made some moves that have been more consistent with the adoption of the Obama administration's Cole memo, which said that they weren't going to prioritize federal enforcement. But that was 2 administrations ago. So it continues to be clear as mud as it relates to whether or not our members should enter this space. But by the same token, our manufacturers, I haven't seen anybody making any new investments or saying, hey, and lastly, it's still unclear. It remains unclear whether beverage is going to be a delivery vehicle for THC. We've watched combustibles as a share of the market decline in many places, but beverage is not taking that. Edibles and other applications of THC are the way that the market is going.
Right. So far. And, just me thinking, because I'm no expert on it, but descheduling it without any regulatory framework just opens up the illicit market. It'd be like the 21st Amendment saying, okay, alcohol is legal, but we're not going to make any rules about it, well, I guess we'll see how it all plays out.
Particularly when you have a product that you know less about. That is the challenge. Yeah. And that's, as the major manufacturers exited, that to me was a real, and some of these suppliers have been putting massive pressure on our member companies to sell their CBD product. I mean, that was not a made up thing. And indeed, they've decided to go another direction. So
regardless of what they do or don't do and how comprehensive or limited it is, until they have enough votes in the Senate to pass something. I haven't had any real recent conversation in terms of, any big shift in the Senate attitude of 60 senators to vote for some, comprehensive piece on legalization or decriminalization. So it's not, I personally don't want to come across as predicting that there'll be some big legislative, success for that industry in 2024. My comments are with regard to the Safe Banking Act and that piece of legislation that is not about legalization. That is just about business operations. So that's a different thing.
Well, great. I've kept you guys too long. It really was a fascinating, great conversation. Any last thoughts to end up the year as we go into the holidays?
Well, Harry, I want to close the year by saying a couple of things. The first is kind of what we talked about at the beginning of this. This has been a year for the record books. It's been crazy for the beer industry. It's been crazy in politics. It's been crazy for many, many of our members. Things that we never could have imagined happened. But one of the things that we don't often do is thank you, because, you had some incredible coverage this year of some things that needed to be reported on, and that is appreciated. I mean, having a trade media that is bold, that is not afraid, that calls balls and strikes, that reports the news, but also shines a little bit of light on things is really, really important. So,
well, thank you so much. I mean, honestly, one could go decades without getting any compliments in the trade press. So it's really appreciated. And I also would like to point out that Craig will be sitting on a panel at our Beer, Wine, and Spirits Summit, January 14th through 16th. I think we still have a few tickets left. We're going to be shutting that down pretty soon here, but we look forward to seeing you on that panel with your, let's just say, cousins, if not brothers and sisters. So over in the wine and spirit side and on the beer side. So, well, good. All right, guys. Well, thanks, and have a good holiday if I don't talk to you again. And we'll see you in San Diego, Craig, in January. And you too, Laura. You're welcome to come as well. So,
all right, guys.
Happy
holidays. Cheers.
Bye-bye.